Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the British land revenue systems that didn't just change India's landscape, they completely rewired it. We're talking about new classes of rich and poor and a powder keg that was set for decades of conflict, and it all kicked off with an absolute disaster.
Let's start with a truly staggering number, 1/3. That's roughly how much of Bengal's population died in the horrifying famine of 1770. Now, you might think this was just a terrible act of nature, but really, it was a complete failure of governance.
You see, this famine threw a spotlight on a massive problem. The East India Company, remember, they were a trading company, had suddenly become the financial administrators of Bengal. They were merchants, not rulers. They desperately needed a stable, predictable income to pay for their army and administration, but their first attempts to get it were just chaotic and incredibly destructive.
So what do? Well, their first big swing at a solution was pretty radical, actually. It was a system designed to bring order to the chaos, to create some predictability for everyone involved. They called it the permanent settlement.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty. The year is 1793. The man in charge, Governor General Lord Cornwallis, along with his revenue expert, John Shore, they cook up this system they think is going to solve all their problems. The goal? To create a sort of English countryside, but in India. And on paper, the logic was actually pretty slick. The idea was, if you fix the government's tax demand forever, then the zamindars, who were the local tax collectors, would have a real reason to invest and improve their land. Any extra money they made was theirs to keep. The company gets its stable income, the zamindars get rich. What could possibly go wrong? Right? And this right here is the absolute key. You have to understand this. The British weren't just changing a job title. No, they were creating an entirely new class of hereditary landowners from scratch. This was a massive, fundamental shift from how things worked before.
So here's how the math worked. Of all the rent a zemindar collected from the peasants on his estate, a whopping 89% had to be paid to the company. He got to keep the other 11%, plus anything extra he could squeeze out of the land. Now, that state's cut was steep, for sure, but the big selling point? It was permanent.
But of course, there was a catch. And oh man, was it a ruthless one. It was called the Sunset Clause. The revenue payment was completely inflexible. It didn't matter if you had a drought or a flood. If your payment wasn't in the government's hands by sunset on the due date, you lost it all. Your entire estate went up for auction. Okay, so that's the theory. How did this whole thing actually play out on the ground? Well, a system this unforgiving was bound to create some big winners, and even bigger losers. And here's the crazy part. The very people this system was supposed to prop up, the zamindars, they often became the first casualties. Those initial revenue demands were set incredibly high. Many of the old aristocratic zamindars just couldn't make the payments. And thanks to that sunset clause, they had to watch as their ancestral lands were sold off to the highest bidder. And what about the people actually working the land? The farmers who'd been there for generations? They were absolutely crushed. Legally, they were demoted to just tenants. They lost all their traditional rights to the soil and were now completely at the mercy of the zamindar for rent and the local moneylender just to survive. So, wait a minute. If the old landlords are losing and the farmers are losing, who's actually winning here? Well, a new power player was emerging right there in the villages. Meet the jotedars. Think of them as the rich peasants, the guys who also happened to control local trade and, crucially, money lending. They had the cash and they had the influence inside the village. So when a zamindar couldn't pay his taxes, it was often the jotedars who swooped in, bought the land at auction, and became the new, often even tougher, landlords. All right, so the permanent settlement in Bengal, kind of a mess. This, plus the fact that South India was a totally different world. You didn't have these huge zamindar estates. It forced the British to go back to the drawing board and try something completely different. So, down in the Madras region, this guy, Governor Thomas Munro, he comes up with a whole new plan. It's called the Rayat Wari system, and the big idea was simple. Let's just get rid of the middleman altogether. The company would deal directly with each individual farmer or Rayat. And this is where things get really interesting, because you see this huge gap between the idea and what actually happened. In theory, hey, the farmer owns land, but in reality, the government basically became one giant all-powerful zamindar. Taxes were supposed to be fair and based on careful land surveys, but often they just skip that part and set them at crushingly high levels. And the result of all this? Well, check out this number: 18 million. That's how many acres of land in just the Madras region were sitting empty and unused by 1855. Why? Simple. The taxes were so ridiculously high, nobody could turn a profit farming it. So we've got one system in Bengal, another in the south. But wait, there's more. A third kind of hybrid system popped up in the north. So let's take a step back and look at all three of these major experiments to see how the British tried to get their money from across India. First up, in northern India, they tried something called the Mahalwari system. You can think of it as a middle ground. Instead of dealing with one big landlord or every single farmer, they made the whole village, the Mahal, the unit. The village headman had the job of collecting the taxes from everyone and paying the company. And when you lay them all out side by side like this, you can really see the key differences. It all boils down to a few questions. Who owns the land? Is it a zamindar, the individual farmer, or the whole village? And is the tax fixed for good, or does it change every 20 or 30 years? The answers to those questions basically defined life for millions of people for over a century. Okay, so why are we digging into all this 200-year-old tax policy? Because this wasn't just about money. No, this was, in effect, a massive social engineering project that left a deep and permanent mark on rural India. This timeline, it tells a really clear story, doesn't it? It's a story of trial and error. As the East India Company grabbed more and more territory, they kept tweaking their playbook. But they were always chasing one thing: maximizing and securing their revenue. And that's really the bottom line. By deciding who got to own the land, the British did way more than just collect taxes. They created new social ladders, they locked generations of farmers into debt with moneylenders, and they completely rewired the very fabric of village life in India. So we'll leave you with this question to chew on. When a system, designed by a for-profit company just to make money, ends up completely reshaping an entire society, who's on the hook for the consequences long after they're gone? It's something that continues to echo in debates about land and poverty in India even today.